Okay, so welcome to the weekly Cycle Smart Coaches Call. We don't have our entire staff here, but we have Al Donahue, Mike Vandenham, Jordan Villela, and myself, Adam Meyerson. And what we're going to talk about this week is Paris to Ancaster gravel race in Ancaster, Toronto area, Canada. This is an event that we have all done some number of times for a long time. I think I did my first one in 2013. And for all of us, it's our favorite gravel race. And I, because we are so excited about it and like participating in it, um, we've sort of taken upon ourselves in a lot of ways to evangelize about it. We sort of think like this is what gravel should be. If all gravel was like this, it would be really exciting for lots of different types of racers. And I think it's a very different event than what a lot of Americans think of when they think of gravel, the type of gravel that you get maybe in the Southwest or South Central or Midwest big gravel races. And so it's very particular in that way. And there's a lot to talk about. It gets a gigantic turnout. I think they had over 3,000 participants last year. And I think like a lot of big things that happen in Canada, it can be hidden for Americans. For US folks, don't pay as much attention to some of the things that are happening in Canada that they should be. It's not that far away for many people. If you're in the Chicago area, anywhere in New England, it's certainly driving distance for lots and lots of US riders, and really want to encourage people to come out. A lot of the fields are full already. What's our official date for P to A this year?
April
Yeah,
28th.
28th, 29th,
Of
29th.
April. Yeah, last weekend of April. Um, and so we're going to talk about just the overall characteristics of the race, like why this race is special, what makes it different, and why do we like it so much. We'll talk about like the features. There's some very specific features of the course, the mud chutes, the rail trail, things like that. We're talking about equipment choice. Equipment choice for this race is sometimes a little different than other gravel races, including clothing. We'll talk about nutrition. They've added a few different distances, and that changes the nutrition, and sort of how to eat in a, let's say, a very active gravel race where you're engaged the whole time and eating can be difficult. And then just tactics and pacing. It's often a group race. Multiple riders come into the finish together. There's selections that get made. Sometimes it has the rhythm of a road race. Or you might do the whole thing, at the pace that you can sustain. So we're going to talk about those differences. Good. Everybody like that? Those are our topics.
Sounds perfect.
Also
Yep.
worth noting, it's one of the safest gravel races we've ever been to, with over 700 volunteers making sure you're safe on any intersection, which is uncommon in gravel. They stand out very far ahead of any other event I've ever seen in terms of caring about athlete safety.
Yeah,
It's definitely the most professionally run gravel race I've ever been a part of. Like, just felt cared for the entire time on the race course. Road shut down, full rolling enclosure for some parts. It's fantastic how
For
they put
sure.
it on.
When the standard on gravel races is put the route in your GPS because we didn't bother marking it, they definitely stand above.
Yeah, I think we were.
12-year-olds to the event, so like I want to make sure that a kid that doesn't have much road experience is safe on it, and I do feel that's reasonable in this event.
Right. I think one of our complaints sometimes of the big gravel races is, like Mike said, it's open roads and there's not marshals at turns. And P to A runs like a traditional road race with, I mean, not just marshals, but often police at every intersection and closed roads. And safety is really paramount. And you can focus on the racing. You don't have to worry about coming around a corner on an intersection and there possibly being a car there waiting for you because there's a cop or 10 marshals. Or yeah, it's a good point. We talk about characteristics of the course. Like, I suppose safety is the first thing that you can talk about there, and it really stands out for that. Um, with the course itself, I would say it's it's generally flat, but there's some notable elevation, and some of the notable elevation is actually downhill rather than uphill. I think a lot of the hilly sectors come at the end, but the real I think the main way that I've always described it is, of course, I've never done Paris-Roubaix, but it rides the way I imagine a race like Paris-Roubaix rides, where it's a road race with selections, with sectors. And in P to A, the sectors are cyclocross races. You're in a road race and you're in a pack, and all of a sudden you make a right-hand turn off a main road into the woods. And for the next 5 minutes, it's the first lap of a cyclocross race.
Maximal effort.
Yeah, everybody goes all in, and you come out the other side and see who's made the split, and then you group into that, whatever you come out of that sector in, and maybe you chase, maybe you wait for the group behind, maybe you've made the selection and you can sit in, and it's that over and over again all day.
What's really interesting for people, I think, to understand here is like when you think gravel race, you think the entire course is gravel because that's sort of what it's come to be in recent years. But Paris Ancaster predates that. Actually, I think they just celebrated their 25th anniversary, maybe even 30th.
I think longer than that. Yeah.
So if you think that we think of gravel as whatever, those races starting in 2015, 16, it's way before that. And the flavor, that's why its flavor is so unique. So probably 50% of the course is paved. Would you guys say that that's about correct? Or very fast open gravel, and then, like you said, kind of split up by these incredibly technical sections. And yeah, I think Paris-Roubaix is a good, they call it Canada Spring Classic for a reason. It feels like a race like that.
Yeah. 30th anniversary this year. First one was in 1994. And yeah, probably 50% paved. And I think of the rail trail sections that are not exactly pavement, but super hard packed cinder. That's essentially, those, they ride like paved sections for sure.
Yeah, it's like limestone. They're not really like pavement, but not really
rail
gravel,
trail, cinder,
rail trail.
There's sort of a funny attitude in some gravel racing right now where like pavement is bad, but I actually think this makes the race so much better because it gives, like you said, it gives a chance for all of these things to happen, for groups to form, for things to come back together, to split apart. You really don't know. The strongest person isn't necessarily going to win P-Day. It's not a watts per kilo contest like some super flat, windswept, heavy, entirely on gravel race might be.
Right. And
so tire, or when do we talk about tires?
Well, I think before we talk about tires, let's talk about, if we've identified that it's some cyclocross sections, some paved sections, but very specifically, there's a couple sections that really stand out. So we've talked about the general characteristics of the course, but what are the parts? And Mike, you've won this race. What really stands out as like what parts of the course do those final selections get made? I think the thing that we always talk about are the mud chutes. The two mud chutes you can win the race on the mud chutes, and you can also lose the race.
But a lot of the selections are made by the mud chutes. I think it's important to back up far earlier, because one of the first times that a real selection is made is kind of through this narrow, single tracky, rutted road, and that often has like a dismount in the middle of it. I think you guys know the one I'm talking about, where you go over a log. And each time there's a lot of things like that, and each time the group gets whittled down from, to be honest, going into that, sometimes it's 100 people. It gets whittled down from that to half, and then it halves again, and then it halves again. So it's hard for us to sit here and be like, oh, this is at kilometer whatever, and this is at kilometer whatever, but it is useful to kind of understand if you're going to Paris to Ancaster. Let's be clear, you cannot pre-ride all of the course. One of the unique things about P to A is that certain sections are on private land and they can't be pre-ridden, but there are big sections of the course, and they have maps on their website that you can go and look at, and you can kind of understand how the course flows together. But generally, the first third of the race for sure is mostly wide open, and it just gradually gets more and more technical. And then these pinch points come in that really start splintering the group.
Will you make a sheet on your stem or top tube saying where, like what K the pinch points are at? Because there are so many of them.
Absolutely. Unless you've done it so many times, you understand where they are. You should have them written out, because you can waste a lot of energy trying to stay at the front all the time if you don't know where that is.
Yeah, and that happens quickly. You could feel within the group this swell happen before a sector, and it really starts to like everybody gets nervous. You have to be in the right position, or you're going to find yourself shuffled back really quickly. And it happened to me rapidly, and I was not aware when this was going to happen. I thought I could just cruise my way through with some extra cyclocross skills, and it was not. It was, I got pushed back quickly.
I think where some gravel races rely on the GPS, P to A has always been the opposite. You don't get the GPS because they don't want you to know or to pre-ride, and there's small changes every year. Now, in recent years, they've started distributing a GPS file the day before the race. And so I would recommend to people, and we did this last year, we took that GPS file and we sat with all of our athletes in a room and we looked at that file and we compared it to our previous our own personal GPS files from previous events and figured out like here's a sector, here's a sector, here's a sector. Now, not everybody may have time for that attention to detail, but if you do, it was very beneficial for us. And we were able to mark, hey, this is a sector we need to be up front for. We need to move up here in advance of this right-hand turn, and you should be looking for that turn. So we're starting to get a little bit into tactics, and I just want to back up a little bit before we go too far down that road. I think, Mike, you've identified when we talk about the characteristics of the course that it's these selections leading into those cyclocross sections. And those cyclocross sections are sometimes wet, like weather impacts those sections. They're always a little wet, even when it's dry. And in particular, the Mineral Springs chute, as we said before the call, humorously, like it's a mineral spring chute. It's never dry. It's always wet, even in dry P to A races. And the Mineral Spring chute is one you can pre-ride. That's open. The Power Line mud chute, which is the last one, is private property and typically closed unless you have signed up for a paid VIP pre-ride with the event, where then sometimes the landowner is opening that section as part of that pre-ride the day before the event. That's something you have to check and see what's included in those packages this year. But people do focus on the mud chutes, and I think you're right. They almost over focus on them because they stand out, but most of the race is decided by the time you get to that section. And I'd say, as much as anything else, the final climb is where if you come to the finish with another person, you get separated on that final climb, right?
I did. Yeah, I wanted to talk about that. Is that the finish of this race is a lot more than the mud chutes. It's these two mud chutes, which are actually separated by a sneaky, challenging section of road.
Yeah, hilly sections. Yeah,
uphill drag of gravel, and then by, I think it's a 3 or 4 minute effort if you're winning the race from the bottom to the top. So if you're cracked, like I've been at this race in years past, it might be a lot more than that. And it goes from kind of a technical false flatty drag up to a full-on max 2 minute effort. So yeah, like you said, if you go into the mud chute with the group, the mud chute staying upright is going to be much more important than attacking.
Trying to go fast. Yeah. You're basically trying not to lose the race there as much as you are trying to win it. And I've certainly been in that section and done this myself, where you get to those sections, you think, I'm going to send it here. And there's just not that much to gain and a lot to lose. The best thing is to pick a nice line. And the fastest way down is to be ready to react to, there's just hidden sticks under the mud. You think you've picked a nice line and you can't see that there's a route that goes the same direction as the fall line, like under, and all of a sudden you think you're good and your tire starts moving to the left because there's a stick under there that's pushing you the other way. And that's how a lot of tip overs happen, I think, for people on those sections. And there's a lot of mini bunny hopping that you have to do, lifting your wheel out of the rut or over a stick to be able to get down those sections. So yeah, let's use that to lean into equipment choice, because I do think, again, compared to other gravel events, the characteristics of this course lead to different equipment choices than you might expect at a gravel race. And I think historically, I think this has changed recently because we have dedicated gravel bikes now, but this is a race that we always did on our cyclocross bikes on file tread cyclocross tires, and in fact, tubulars. We always raced this on 33 millimeter Griffo XS file tread type tubulars. So you had something that was fast for the road sections and you could survive the cyclocross sections. Now we have gravel bikes and lower bottom brackets and room for 40 millimeter tires and tubeless. And so like how has the approach changed equipment wise, keeping in mind that you need, again, a tire that's going to roll fast on a course that's half pavement, a tire that's going to get you through, I don't know what the total number of minutes of what you would call cyclocross, but like wooded sections that you have to navigate. And then those mud chutes, dirt roads, and then the mud chutes. How's the equipment, you think, choice changed over the years?
I mean, the winner of last year's race still rode cross tires.
Yeah. What did you ride? Did you ride tubeless or tubulars?
I won 2 years ago, but yeah, I rode tubeless Almanzos, which are basically a file tread.
Yeah, that's right. Those are the ones I like to train.
Yeah. Tubeless Grifos last year.
Isn't a lot of pedaling traction demand, and a big tire floats on too much of the mud, except for the final chute. I'd love to have a 40, but every other section you would just be swimming on top of the mud.
And so much of the mud, the technical mud sections are downhill. Like you said, there's not a lot of pedaling traction demand. So can you keep your bike upright? Can you steer? I think what the differentiator I think we've come to is last year was an exceptionally wet year. Going to something with a little more tread was worthwhile. A lot of other times people are just running file treads, right?
Right. Even
so
last
Curtis
year,
was Curtis running Griffo's front and rear?
That I don't remember.
I opted. Even
front
even
tire
in last
support for
year's
steering.
muddy, even in the muddiest version that I'd seen, I still ended up running my normal. I rode the Almanzos, which is a grip, what used to be the Griffo XS. So that challenge tire is in their gravel line, but the cross riders, we still really like that tread.
It's how a mid tread in a file, never a mud.
That's right.
That's
good.
There's not enough, even in the muddiest years, there's not enough mud to warrant a mud.
That's right. The heaviest tire I think you would ever run would be a Griffo style, a mid tire. Yeah. And even then I would say you can make that decision based on your skill or preference. So I rode tubeless last year. I've always ridden tubulars in the past, but I felt it's such a commitment to race it on tubulars because if you do get a puncture, you maybe can repair it with sealant out there, but you're really stuck. And so I went with the tubeless for a little bit of the flat protection and the ability to get myself home if I flatted. So even I moved over to tubeless.
It's a good one for inserts too, because of the rocks we hit. Or Mike, do you think inserts?
You know what? I have never run inserts there before, but it's something I'm really considering because, like you said, it would have let you run slightly lower pressure.
And there's some
worrying about smashing your rims.
Yeah, there's enough shale, like in a sharp stuff, that I'd like to have that protection.
And I watched so many people flat out.
The data is not great on inserts yet, but from what I've seen, they don't actually add a lot of rolling resistance, and there's not a lot of climbing in the first place. So it's probably a minimal cost for potentially a lot of gain.
So the only thing I'd say about inserts is, I'd say the rear is going to take more impact than the front, right? You're probably going to hit more stuff on your rear. So an insert in the rear would make more sense. But when you do get a flat with an insert, unless it's a run flat, something like a Vittoria run flat kind of insert, they can be really troubling to get off, right? So like get the tire off because the insert sinks to the bottom and then the bead gets kind of stuck on. So if you need to do anything that's kind of like preventative or maintenance wise, that would be tough.
Now,
I would say
maybe I'm characterizing my opinion on this race, which has always been, if I flat, I'm not winning anymore. So all I need to be able to do is get home. Everyone's going to have to make that decision for themselves, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of been but that's been my approach. I'm carrying as little equipment as possible, where if I flat, I can make it home, but I'm out of the race. It's done.
Cross country style. Like I'm not fixing this flat,
And that's probably true, I think, no matter where you are in the field, because if you have a puncture, your best result, whatever that is is now out of reach for you. And so, of course, you want to change it as quickly as you can and get going, but you're mostly just trying to get to the finish line at that point. So you do have time to change it. And so I think, yeah, the question with inserts is really, yeah, we understand, let's say it's minimal penalty other than, the installation aspect, but will it allow you to prevent pinch flats even with tubeless? There were just so many flats. Like there's one section where you're on a dike basically, and it's like a gravel double track, and you're always going in and out of the whoop. It's like a Jeep
Yeah.
trail basically that's on the top. You're riding across the top of a dike, and it's wooded. I mean, I passed 10 people there who had flatted or on the side of the road because they must have bottomed out on those. It's pretty big. It's probably the only part of the track that's actually gravel, like big rocks, like a trail made out of
Yeah.
rocks. It's the one section where fat tires would be an explicit advantage. It's probably the only section that is. But I did see a lot of people flatting there, but some of that is riding style too. Are you able
I'm
to
guessing pinch
ride?
flats
Yeah.
are a big deal, and a lot of new tubeless manufacturers are putting bead chafers in along the bead, right? So there's the bead of the tire, goes casing to casing, and then around the beads there's these new chafers. It's kind of like an enduro thing they've been doing for a while. New gravel tires are going to start coming with it. So when you get that pinch flat against the bead pushing inside the tire, it's probably going to be more resilient. So I think
Well,
new tires are going to have some of these updated things.
so
I
you're
think
saying if you get that flat that's almost impossible to plug right along the bead, it's just less likely to happen.
It's
Those
less
are the
likely to
worst
happen
ones.
with these new
Yeah,
technologies. Yeah.
like
The
most
older
other
ones,
you can plug.
yeah, that's the worst one. You're going to need a lot of bacon strips for that guy,
Oh,
and it's like a lot of shaking the tire.
how
maybe
much
this.
can you?
Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead,
Mike.
Adam.
Well, I was going to say, I think the main thing that we did within our crew and the decision making process last year was we ran a little extra pressure for the flat protection, right? So
Yeah.
what we've decided on here is fast treads, right? File treads or a mid chevron. Second,
I went with the Conti Terra Speed, which was
yeah,
like it was like a dotted tread,
yeah.
a
So
little raised.
I don't think, to be clear, I don't think we all got used to running 33s. I don't think there's anything wrong with a 35 or a 36 either. But I'm saying you
I
don't
ran a
need a
35.
40 or a 45 or whatever.
that's right. So that's right. That's what I want to summarize. So we've talked about tread, and then I would say these days we've mostly abandoned racing tubulars and moved to tubeless for this event. Even though tubulars would give you an exceptional amount of performance, you need to be able to get home, and tubeless is going to let you get home. And you might argue that you'll get fewer punctures on tubeless than you will with tubular. But then the key is, let's call it mid width. So 33, 35, maybe 38 is even starting to get bigger than you need for this, but 40, that 40 and up traditional gravel, of course you're going to be fine. Run what you brung. We're not saying, like ride the bike you got. It's not a problem, but you don't need a 40 or bigger. You need something smaller than that. But we haven't talked about pressure. And I think the last thing that we should say here is the way I think we prevented that kind of pinch flatting was I ran 30 PSI. And if you run 30 PSI, I weigh 155, 160 pounds in a 33 tubeless at 30 PSI. You've got some bounce and some shock absorption, but you're not going to bottom out. That's a lot of pressure for that tire. And
But I think people make the mistake of running way more as well.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
they're on a narrow tire, right? Like
Yeah.
the analogy I like to use is if you imagine you have a balloon and you have a really inflated balloon, any like pinprick on it's going to pop it. If you have a less inflated balloon, there's a lot more deformation of the tire when you do hit a rock. Because I think people are on Paris to Ancaster running 45 psi as well because they're like, well, I'm on a 33.
Yeah. And they're getting no bounce out of that tire at all.
And they're just slicing their sidewall on the first rock.
Instead of it compressing, it's getting sliced. Yeah, it's a very good point. So enough pressure that you're not going to bottom out, not so much pressure that you don't get any flex from the casing. And, this is again why I really like that challenge handmade tubeless is they ride like tubulars. The casing is flexible and soft and you get a lot of performance out of it. Um, for bikes, I think gravel bike, cross bike. I mean, people ride their mountain bikes, like whatever bike you're most comfortable on. You probably could do this on a road bike if it had clearance for the tires. But I think
Definitely mountain bike pedals.
Yes.
yes, great point out.
Yes.
Right. You will be off your bike, and though some people are racing gravel on road pedals, this is not one of them. You will be running at moments.
Yeah.
Toe spikes or no toe spikes?
I don't.
Not necessary, but
There's,
not a
there's not really
penalty.
a harm to having them, though, right?
If your shoes still have spikes in them from cross season, you might as well leave them in.
Like the soccer cleats would be a good one, not big metal fangs.
Yeah, rubber, something rubber. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was at last year. Just kind of left them where I was at.
If you're more in the scrum, like kind of deeper in the field, not getting into the chutes near the front, then you might have to get off and run. And so that's where like mud clearance and toe spikes might come in more handy.
And to be sure, and we'll talk, I think this is a good way to segue into clothing. You know, we could get any kind of weather. We've had warm days where we raced in short sleeves. It was crazy. And like last year, it just rained more or less the whole time. And so when you're thinking about clothing, it's tough because it's an early morning start and it's cold and you're cold. You got to get up early for this one.
And a lot of road in the beginning too, so there's a lot more wind chill and wet spray. So that's
Yeah.
like if you get freezing in that first hour, you're toast. Like we had someone that happened to, and they burned through all of their fuel being cold in the first hour. Not
Yeah.
a good.
Yeah.
But do you have time to take things off and put them in your pocket? Like, are the roads like, so if you overdress or dress warmly at the start and, you know, in the Cento, in the 100K, we had a long, I don't remember, we were on the road for half an hour maybe before we went into the first section. So I'd say like we had time to warm up and then maybe take a jacket off or a vest off or something before you went into the woods. There were moments, but that is a skill level. You have to have a certain skill level to be able to take those clothes off. And you do see people underdressing, like dressing for the end of the race rather than the beginning of the race. But
Want to get real weird? You shove bubble wrap up the front of your jersey for the windy part, and then you just pull the bubble wrap out and stick it in your pocket.
Yeah.
A lot less kind of dexterity needed for that, but you get a good wind blocker that retains a lot of heat.
Yeah,
I've typically worn a vest for this race, though, at least,
right.
right?
You have
Because
to,
that's
something you can take off easily.
and often I've
Yeah.
actually finished with it, but yeah,
Right.
it's something that you can take off if you need to. And there is definitely a moment, hour and a bit into the race, when you hit the rail trail for the first time, when it does, just by the nature of being on the rail trail, kind of chill out a little bit, and you have some time to remove some clothing if you need to.
The only thing that's
Yeah.
tough there is the rail trail is like two abreast, double
Yes.
track, and people are always trying to, you have to be on alert on the rail trail. But
With
you,
poles in the middle, let's say that one.
yeah,
With poles in the
Like
middle.
you can't let your guard down on the rail trail. But the point is taken that don't overdress, but dress for the weather at the start with clothing that you can take off. I realize maybe you're not going to take your leg warmers off in the middle of the race, but a jacket that you can take off that you can slide over your hands easily. You know, the
Or
new
even
yeah.
arm warmers on a warm year, you can just slide them down. It's not terribly stylish, but they're off your arms.
I don't think it's
Last year I wore
stylish enough. I think that's fine. And that's what a vest is good instead of a jacket, right? So I think these are your options. You wear a jersey with a base layer and arm warmers and a vest, as opposed to a jacket over that thing where the vest and the sleeves are connected, right? That's the decision that you're making. But it's sometimes harder to take that jacket off because you've got to pull that cuff over your hands, and you definitely will have gloves on, which you might take off at some point, but for sure it's a race that you start with gloves on.
That's where I got
one thing I like
dip is really good because you can get it out, you get most of the way up and get wind on your chest. You can really modify that to stay at the right temperature
and
especially
access to your pockets.
On.
Sure. Last year I wore these it's like a wind resistant, glove from Specialized. I wear it for all my cross races that are like kind of wet and cold, something to kind of lock in that heat. And it's real thin, like you still have dexterity with it. That helped me a lot because I felt like my hands were getting cold and they stayed kind of like dry through this whole thing, but it wasn't so bulky that I lost any like, lever feel or anything like that. And they were easy to tuck in and, put in my pockets.
Yeah,
So
it's a
I'd say
lot like a
something with
cross
like a
race,
wind
right? In
front.
this, in the sense that you need your hands. You can't wear bulky gloves because you need to drive your bike, but you
Yeah.
also need your hands to be warm enough that you can drive your bike. So
This
it's
is
very much
Yeah.
finding that midweight glove where you can feel your bars on the wet, cold one.
Because
Sometimes
it
you
was just like the wind
no.
layer, that wind proof layer, really like, how it could be a little bit of like waterproof, but also like just kind of buckle in that heat. I like that. And it went up really high. But last year was my first year doing this race. I mean, I loved it, but I experienced all of the classics weather. It was like all rain, all like, I mean, even sunglasses are like a topic of discussion because like, people were wearing glasses. And I saw one of the guys I was riding with, it was like he got mud and it was just, blinders on because,
So
it depends on
that's a
what
great
you're,
point because what the people, and this was
Cross-country
not
ski
me,
gloves are really good because they usually have something to wipe your nose and you can clear your lenses sometimes.
but what the
yeah,
people who are not me figured out, I think Adam and Curtis both did this, is you know what works better than sunglasses when it's muddy is a cycling cap because it
Yeah.
no way.
deflects a lot of that mud away from your eyes.
That's really
Yeah.
smart. Yeah.
I like the I like a cap to keep my head warm in these kinds of conditions and like absorb a little bit sweat. And like I don't have hair, so I got to put something on my head. It's a little different for me, but absolutely a hat. And then once we were covered in grit, I think at some point I probably flipped my hat up, but even flipping it up will help keep some of the gravel grit out of your eyes. And again, like it was an exceptionally like wet and gritty edition last year. I do think you have to start in glasses. It's almost always, it feels like it's always gloomy and cloudy. So I prefer fully clear lenses. At the very least, you want something that's photochromatic. So when you, because you, even if you're out on the road and there's some sun, you're going to go into the woods at some point and you have limited light in the woods and you need to be able to see the ground. So you should err on more light coming through rather than more sun protection or
Yeah.
I've got a strong preference for clear. Photochromatic doesn't change, and half the time when it's gloomy, there's enough UV that it triggers them to be dark enough that they're useless in the woods.
that's
If
exactly
you were
right.
a
And that
Yeah.
happened to me.
mountain
That
biker,
happened to me last
yeah.
year.
The wind will end your race if you can't see.
I went
Like,
photochromatic
100%.
last year because I thought, oh, it's dark, but there was enough UV coming through that my glasses stayed darker than I wanted to, and I would have been better off with completely clear. Agreed.
I was gonna say, if you're a mountain biker, think the glasses you'd wear mountain biking in the woods. Like
Yeah.
that's the type of
100%.
in out of light that you're kind of dealing with. You can't wear your dark lenses. You can't wear photochromatics.
Because it happens fast, whenever you get into the woods, you want it to be, lighter. You want more depth perception than when you're out.
That's right.
It's sun. But I'm sure most of you guys have done this, but use the water bottle trick where you take them off and spray them off. That was always a nice little help for me during it. Sometimes, with a high energy drink mix, it's a little rough, but you
I was
kind of
going to
gotta
say,
run what you
depending on
brung.
what's in your bottle. Well, I mean, so let's
That
talk
was
about
it.
that. Let's talk about what's in
Because
your bottle.
scraping those lenses, my brain says scrape them, but then uh me after the race is like, man, you just ruined a really nice pair of sunglasses
See,
by trying to clean them off like that.
I always think when my glasses are dirty, they're done. Like they're on my head for the rest of the race or on the back of my head or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a time and it works out okay.
There was a few like
because-
lulls where we were like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? And you get that little thing in the back of your head where you're like, these could be a lot cleaner.
Mine were
It's
like
like
a
the new
helmet
bike. You
ornament
just
for
feel better.
probably half of the race last year.
Yeah.
Jordan, you talked about drink mix in your bottle. I think that we should seize on that because I think
Oh, 100%.
nutrition is really important here, and like how you're getting your calories and carbohydrates here can vary. And so traditionally P to A was 70K race, and a couple of years ago they added the Cento, the 100K race. And there's also and so the old distance, the traditional distance is called the classic. There's a breve, which is a short. I can't remember exactly how long the breve is. Maybe that's 25K or something. It's a little more oriented towards like families and general participation where people are trying to complete the course. And then the Cento is 100K. And the Cento has turned into the premier event, right? The main category. And I think you have to start by saying, how long is your event going to be? And when we talked about it, we've seen the winner of the Cento is finishing in about 3 hours. But you said the median was about 4 hours.
Four.
Most people, or the midpoint, many people are finishing in about 4 hours. I think in the classic, it would take us just over two for the winners for the front group, like
2:10.
2:15.
Yeah.
Yeah. So probably that same range for the classic. Like I bet a lot of people are finishing that in 3 hours as a reason. And again, with a plus or minus a 1 hour range, there's people who are doing the Cento and it's a 6 hour, it's a real commitment and it's a goal for them to finish. So I want to keep those folks in mind as well.
100%.
Right around 3,000 kilojoules, 3,000 to 3,500, depending on how much you weigh. So that's a good thing to think about in your training and nutrition. That's how much you're going to burn. And if you get to that last climb without glycogen, it's not a fun climb.
It is
No.
not. It is a hard climb to just, I've gotten there and just said to myself, like 1 foot in front of the other, right? And you don't want to get there that
People that
crap.
don't do a lot of walking on that climb.
That's right. People do.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
If like, so me last year, being my first experience, I knew it was coming, but I didn't know exactly what it was, and it's kind of like technical single track a little bit, and then it's a lot of undulating kind of punches that you need a lot of energy for. It's not like you could soft pedal up it like being completely cracked. So you have to just keep eating.
And so coaches, when let's just use the 4 hour target, and people can adjust from there. But if you're saying, 3,000 to 4,000, 3,500 kJs, we're talking about like kilojoules per hour and carbohydrates per hour. Of course, it's going to be different for different people based on how much power you make and how big you are and how hard you're pedaling. How are you taking those calories and carbohydrates in for this race? Are you relying on like bars that are a mix of carbs and fat and protein, or maybe some kind of chews that are 100% carbohydrate?
Yeah.
For your drink mix, are you taking in? Yeah, hold that thought. Wait, hold that thought. Let me just finish this list of choices. For your bottle, are you taking just a normal hydration drink that's 3 or 4%, or are you going for a high carbohydrate, like 100 grams of carbohydrates per bottle type drink mix? So I think that's our menu, right? And so what are we choosing from that menu? Sorry,
Yeah.
Alex. Yeah.
I think the difference with this is there's such high intensity where, like, if you're in a long gravel event, you don't want to be hitting zone 5 and like after halfway or like after you get through the first start selection. But this one is punctuated by a lot of zone 5, which is just, straight carbohydrate utilization. And your gut's not going to work well for all of those sections. So faster digesting, more like isotonic gels in a kind of a little bit heavier bottle, or heavier than 3 or 4%, but with a more complex sugar. That's kind of my preference. I think Mike needs to eat and drink a lot more.
And would you be?
There's some real logistical challenges with eating bars in this one as well.
Yeah,
it's a busy race.
You need your hands. Yeah,
exactly. Well, you often need your hands.
And are you with the drink mix? Are you like adding like maltodextrin to a traditional, like a normal hydration mix, or are you opting to like buy the high carb mix and use it at a lower percentage than what they recommend to get the ratio that you want?
I'd go for a high carb mix.
Yeah, I've been going to high carb mix as well and running it at full strength. But I think it is reasonable to say that you shouldn't be like, I'm going to run 100 grams in my bottles for the first time at Paris to Ancaster. That's don't do that.
You got to test it somewhere because it's hard to drink. Also, it's not just hard to eat. At PAA, it can be hard to drink, and you got to remind yourself, like, every time you get to a road section, if there's a lull, sometimes you get to a road section and a split has happened, and you don't rest when you get to the road section. You start chasing. You're in a group and you have to keep working hard. But anytime there's a lull, you have to take in as much as you can in that window while you have it.
Is there a case?
I ran beta fuel last year, and I like that, but my stomach is used to that. Like, I run that mountain biking, the SIS stuff, and that worked well. The fuel formulas, mix works well. for you all, did you run 2 bottles of that high octane mix, or did you run one of more of a hydration plus that, and then one of like a super bottle? How did you guys, and
Yeah,
what
we were just having debate about this because
volume bottle, you know?
there are aid stations. You do not know what you're getting, and you're not. One of the things I love about this race actually is it's not one of these things where you need to bring an army of people out because it's a neutral aid, right? It for me, anyways, it kind of annoys me when you see these gravel races and it's this whatever gravel's this privateer thing, and it turns out you need 4 support staff because they have to staff all these feed stations. They have great feed stations here and they have stuff in them, but at the same time, it's not your stuff. So you do need to be aware of like, are you going to stop at the feed to get whatever is there? Is it going to be Gatorade? Is it going to be drink mix? And how much can you count on that? So my strategy has been to try to carry everything that I need for the race with me, and then the feeds are only a last ditch option. But like Al said,
And no one's
there's a real
stopping.
risk there, and
No
not
one at the
stopping.
front. Yeah, no one at the front is stopping. If you are not concerned about your place, then you can stop and take your time with what you're getting. But for the folks who are, let's say like racing at the front, they're not stopping. And so, Mike, are you going to carry a third bottle or
Right, that's the
use a
real question.
Camelback? Yeah,
It's like I've often done it on 2 tall bottles, but you're walking the line of is that enough? Can you get enough in? One
Yeah.
year it worked out really well for me, and one year I totally cracked.
I think we all went with 2 bottles last year because of the weather too, right? Like, did we decide that 2 bottles that we could do it on 2 bottles?
I had one in my jacket. So I had two, one big, one regular, one like, normal 20, and then I had a shorty
Because
in my jacket.
because a great goal would be if you're doing the Cento and that long opening road section, pound a bottle, right? Like
That's
drink
what I did. Like
aggressively.
I heard
And
Jacob told me that years ago, like it's some road races just to like, if when things are going very chill, you could take that bottle and just crush it and then pop it back in.
yeah.
It's like it never was there.
And to be sure, it's hectic in that early road section, but it's because everybody's trying to get to the front all the time. But you do have opportunities. It's probably the calmest it is all day, and you could get a bottle down and then probably drop it at a Marshall, like, or put it back in your pocket if you have to. But there might be a chance to get rid of it in a non-littering way. But if you had that
Yeah.
third bottle in your body by the time you went into the woods for the first time, that would be an excellent approach.
Yeah,
I
it'll
didn't
be
think
better.
any selections are happening right there. I don't think that there's no move happening on that road section. It's mostly jockeying of the bubble.
People do
in the
attack,
front.
but that's not the move. Don't go.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
talk about tactics. Let's use that to segue into tactics because it is a tactical gravel race. And for sure, there are people attacking nonstop in the first half hour of the race. People want to get that early breakaway vibe, road race style early breakaway vibe going, but everybody's so amped it just doesn't go anywhere. And it's what I observed is this: everybody wants to be at the front. Everybody's on alert for not so much the early move, but the first cyclocross section. That constant, it's almost like being in a Zwift race. That constant, like everybody moving up, keeps the pack going pretty quick until you get to that.
It's a churn. It's a churn. People come in and out, and then you got to remember too, like we're coming up there from the States. In Canada, this is one of the first, right, Mike? This is one of the first big events. Like some of us have had events all year. In the early season for them, this is the first thing, so they're ready to go, and it's their national gravel championship too.
Not this year, but it was
not this year, but last year. Let's just say that.
But it's still a spiritual,
the big race,
Starting
right? So
together.
Good question. What did we do last year? Did they got their own start next to us, right?
Yeah.
We were right. Yeah.
It'll be back to normal this year.
Okay.
Yeah, that didn't work out, or they're just going to go back to.
Oh yeah, maybe it'll be next to us again. It's honestly the start is not. It's not that big of a factor.
It's not.
But like people sprint out of the start, but like
we don't go
of a parade
to get to the road. It was nice because it let the women stage with each, even though we were all going to be racing together, it let them see who their competition was and have like like be near the people that you are going to be racing against before you mix in with everybody else. So it was a nice solution, I thought.
When did they mix
Yeah.
in?
Like immediately, they
Yeah,
just
right.
like they
It
had
went
their
to-
own shoot. We had to
Yeah.
start.
Yeah, it was
The men had to start shoot, and the women had to start shoot, and then we just merged. Yeah, immediately, basically.
So highly influential in the women's race is managing that start with the guys and getting the best group you can.
That's it. I mean, I think those are traditional gravel tactics for combined fields for the women, right? Is there's always going to be a wheel to follow and a group to make. And the strategy for your best result is to make that group and do as little as possible on that group and hang on.
And let's not say that limit is limited to the person trying to win the women's race. That's actually everyone who's not thinking they're going to win the race, right? It's everyone. If you're not thinking you're going to be in the top 20, like that's you too.
Find a wheel. Yeah, find your group. That's right. That's right. I do think the tactics are different if you're just trying to get the best result you can versus trying to win. And so if you're just trying to get the best result you can, then 100%, to reiterate what Mike just said, you're trying to make a group. You're trying to remember where the cyclocross segments are. You're trying to improve your position leading into those sections. Even if you have to make a small effort, that's where you want to invest in your effort. Move up as best you can ahead of those segments. Ride those segments at threshold pace. Like that's your, like I said, everybody has to go as hard as they can in those sections until they come out the other side. I mean, you're above threshold for those 5 minutes. It's VO2 pace. It's first lap of a cyclocross race, not mid race pace. It's first lap pace. And then see where you come out the other side. But improving your position before the segments pays off over and over again. That investment,
it's like sag climbing
of position
in my eyes.
That's right. It'll put you out the other side with a better group than you would have been otherwise if you saved your energy. And because there's also traffic in the woods, you just get stuck behind people who are crashing. You might go fast, somebody else might go slow, vice versa. It's absolutely bananas in all the cyclocross sections. So you want to be as far up for those as you can. And I think when you come out the other side, there's always someone who thinks they're going to chase back to the next group. Someone's always excited. You need to find that excited person and follow them back up. You don't have to be the excited person necessarily, though sometimes if you're the strong rider, you do have to take it upon yourself to put some effort in to get to that next group. We saw lots of splits last year happen that way.
There's a lot of tenacity like within the groups, like when you get to those points. But I found, especially when I was trying to pace, that you don't want to always go with the person. Like for me, I was unfamiliar with some of the people who were in my group, and some people were going and I was like, oh, that guy's going, let's go with them, and you don't want to get coerced into doing an effort with somebody. And then 2 minutes later, they pull the parachute, and then you kind of get lured into these moves where you end up expending more energy than you need to, so I think racing smart and not taking, I wouldn't call it the bait, but the easy effort, the easy way to just start like unloading all the watts, and when you don't need to.
Especially since the race gets harder as it goes, because the elevation happens late and the most difficult technical sections happen late. So it's very easy for people to get excited and pedal too hard in the first half. And I think the first half, even though we said you should move up as best you can for the cyclocross sections, you don't need to be pulling on the road. You don't need to be making the race any harder than it already is, because it's going to be hard. And you need to save those matches for those moments where everyone has to go hard. You need to be good for those sections. I think a thing that we've talked about a lot in our calls is this is a pattern for me in all the races I do in, most of my career. But when we all compared power files after the race every year, and everybody remarked on how little pedaling I was able to do in the first half until we got to the first uphill cyclocross segment where we turned right after the climb and then go into the front. We had identified that as like game on from that point forward. And I think among all of our elite men who were in the Cento, like I had done the least amount of pedaling up to that section. And so how does that happen? Like what are the tactics that let you like save your matches for that moment? What did you observe or how would you evaluate that?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think in this race there's a real nervousness and desire to be at the front, right at the front, where the most efficient spot to be and where you are sitting is almost at the front. You're not getting
10th,
caught in the swell,
10th wheel, 15th
but
wheel.
you're sitting at the back of the pointy part of the arrow, if that makes any sense to people.
It was like on the bubble.
That's
And
right.
Yeah.
And that's an easy thing for me to say or to tell someone to do, but obviously it requires, I mean, that's a lot of skill to get to the point to be able to execute that effectively. But that is the goal, is to be close enough to the front that you can see it and that you're riding the edges, and then you can float when you have a little momentum and you can improve your position without pedaling. You pop out, you pop back in. So you're trying not to be on the brakes just to stay in your spot. You're always using the free speed to improve your position and then getting back into the churn, and then paying attention to, if you're riding the edges, if someone is moving up and you've got a little momentum, oh, you pop out onto that wheel and use them to move up and back in, but never on the front, never taking a pull, never making the race harder than it is, but always being in a good position, especially ahead of those corners. There's people make mistakes in the turns. There's crashes. People miss selection. So
I'd say definitely like keeping your head up is a big deal. Cause I noticed, when you're in, on a road race, sometimes you have people calling out things. I noticed in P to A, some of the like, more bummed out like sections, you're all so tightly packed in there and they're trying to do Adams, what Adam does and like keep it nice. But then there's just like a boom, there's just a crater and you don't see it until, like that happens, and you're, off, or you're like, I'm going to take a gel, and like
you're you're doing a lot of
that's a
little
big
bunny
thing
hops.
within those.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
these are typical. I think part of why, for those of us who are in the Northeast, P to A is fun because it's very similar to roads that we ride here. Like it's not gravel, it's dirt. They're dirt roads. And those dirt roads have washboards and potholes. And so you're on a wheel, but you have to always be looking past the hips of the person in front of you at the ground. You have to be paying attention to the ground. And you can't be swerving left and right to avoid those things. You're doing all these little mini bunny hops all over the place, always looking ahead, 2, 3. It's like tailgating in the left lane at high speed traffic.
Right.
You've got to be looking ahead at what's happening 5 riders in front of you and paying attention to their body language. If they're bunny hopping a pothole that you can't see, if that's a red flag, you need to be looking for that and anticipating it. This is how a lot of crashes happen and how a lot of flats happen, is people are slamming those things because they're not reading the ground. You have to have all your exits noted. You have to have your head in the swivel. You're playing a video game in this race, and you have to be engaged the whole time. And that's part of how you save energy here.
Yeah, it's a mentally exhausting. It can be a physically not that exhausting start to the race if you play it right, but it is mentally exhausting.
Which is part of why this race is fun, right? This is part of the enjoyment. You are always switched on, and it's for the 3 to 4 hours of the race. Man, does it go by fast. You're just busy the whole time. It is nonstop fun.
Yeah. Now, I think the other thing that in the beginning of this race that is really challenging, especially if you have ambitions of a good result, is avoiding like the temptation to be anxious about how big the group is. Right? This is something that's always hit me is you look back and you're like, well, how am I supposed to win this if there's 70 people? And the only advice there is just like, rest assured the group's going to get small. This is not the time to make it small. Because I've done this to myself many times. I've raced this 5 or 6 times. You sit there and you're like, uh-oh, I should attack. It's like, no, the selections are going to happen. Just relax.
I've seen you make that attack and turn it into the winning move also. But that doesn't apply to everybody, right? Like most people who are interested in this advice are not necessarily going to be the ones making the winning move. So if you're one of the 70 in that group, what you're thinking about is, how do I stay in this group? And yeah, there's natural selection. Like the course, this is why I like to Perry Bay. It's like a series of selections. And all day long, you're doing the minimum to stay in the group and then investing where you have to just keep making the selections, make the split, tag on, make the split, tag on, eat after the selection,
Yeah.
do all the things that you need to do before the next selection. But it's that cycle over and over again. And eventually the bottom comes out of it and you miss a split and you end up in a group. And then you got to decide, this is my group. So am I racing these guys or should I work with these guys? Is this a group that I should pull through because we need to keep the group from behind from catching us? Or maybe we can get back to that next group.
And that group up front keeps breaking up too, because you'll start getting those people coming
So
back.
there is a point even for me as like a sprinter who's always trying to be efficient and save my energy, where you have to acknowledge, hey, I got to start. Now I have to start riding. This is my group of 6 people, and I want this group to roll, and I am going to have to invest in this group and help
And
it.
you, in the final, whatever, 20 kilometers, whatever that is in miles, there's a lot of that rail trail. And if you have a well cooperating group, you can mow people down, like Jordan was saying.
Yeah.
And it's going to split up anyways in the mud chutes and the climb. So you don't need to be worried that you're dragging someone to a sprint finish. Like you can pull people back.
Yeah. And I think that's
there's no
you find yourself in a
I was
group.
going to say there's no sprint. There's no you're not going to drag somebody up there. If they're following you the whole way up that dirt climb and they pop out and get you, that's just the dirt climb. That's that final climb.
It's like the only time you should be alone in this race is after the chutes and up the climb. Like you shouldn't be spending any time by yourself before that point. You should be.
I wasn't alone there last year. I had a guy right on my tail, and it was fun. It was hard.
But it is true, like for sure, like after the power line, second mud chute, power line chute, whatever you got left, you just pedal as hard as you can to the finish. There's very little tactics unless you're like evenly matched with somebody. So I think that covers a lot of ground here, and I think that's going to be helpful for a lot of people. Is there anything that we've left out?
I was going to say, like you said, the finish, once you get to the finish, and the finish is hard because it reminded me of these spring races that you do and you get to the end and you're like, oh, this is awesome. I'm done. You're happy. And then your body starts to shut down quickly, right? Your legs start cramping.
It's physically hard to make it up that climb. And so maybe that's just to very quickly back up to equipment choice. Like you need a gear that you can pedal up that last climb with, and it's the only time you need it, but you do need a small gear. It's not like you need a 1-to-1. Well, some people might need a 1-to-1 like traditional.
I raced a double last year, and I like a double,
Al, what were you?
1-to-1 is fine on that one for a lot of people, especially if it's 4-hour range for the 100K.
Yeah. And I think it's more common. That's what people have on their bikes. It's not something that they'd have to set up. They probably already have a 1-to-1 ratio bike. But I like having a double.
Is everything a clutch derailleur now? Because you need a clutch derailleur and narrow wide for this.
Yeah, if you're on one by.
Dropping chains is a big factor in this event.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jordan, you like the double?
I'm a big fan of the double with the GRX in the rear. One that has a clutch on it. I'm a huge fan of that. That's what I rode most across season. And, you can, the new Shimano cranks, you can kind of really dial in your front chainring without really having to change your small one, which I think is a good thing. But I guess what I was going to say,
go ahead. I ran a double as well. Yeah,
you could run a 1 by cross gearing in this race. Like, let's be clear.
Without
there's nothing wrong
I think
with
Curtis won on that, right? So
like if you have a 40 to 44 tooth front ring, the top speed is probably about 55, 60K an hour. So 40 mile an hour.
I would say run what you're comfortable on and run what you're familiar with. Like
no one should be changing, right? No one should be changing their front setup just for this race. But like I like the double as well for something like this, and traditional cross like 36, 46 front chainring, whatever you're running in the back, is nice to have. And you spend most of the race in the big chainring. And then for the climbs, you have a small ring.
If you're winning the race, you'll still be in the big train ring on the last climb, right?
I've never done that. Yeah, that's right. Anything else, guys, or should we wrap it up there?
Yeah, one thing I was going to say, I know we're trying to go, but get that finish bottle. Like when you're done, you should have a recovery drink. You should have a plan for when you're out of there, because you're up at the top of the mountain, you go at the resort or wherever, the rec center. Like, know what you're going to do after that. You can't stand around.
Yeah,
because
we
it's
could
pretty
have
shocking to your
we could have
body.
the logistics of P to A, because it's a point to point race, are require some planning. So for folks who haven't done it before, if you don't have someone traveling with you, I do recommend, booking the bus, getting the VIP package, because you do need that kind of support. It's nice to have all your stuff waiting for you at the finish, and someone to take care of your bike, and then someone to drive you out to the start, because the start is in a different place than the finish. So I think most people know that, but if it's your first P to A, you might not realize that at first. And
Yeah.
anything you can
Invest
do
some
in
time reading
advance,
websites.
yeah,
Yeah.
take care of it. It's worth paying for. You want that kind of help.
And it's not that much more either.
100%.
Well, and right, because we don't all have someone who's willing to come with us and do that kind of driving for us. And so if you don't, like, pay for that help. Thanks, guys. This is great. And I hope for everybody, whether it's your first P to A or it's your 30th P to A, I hope not only is all this info helpful, but also it helps you get stoked for the race.
If you see us up there, come and ask questions. We're happy to talk about it.
That's right. We'll have a bunch of
100%.
Cycle Smart coaches and riders there. We may try to organize a little open invitation course preview on one of the pre-ride maps that are posted on the P to A website. I unfortunately cannot make it this year, which I'm pretty bummed about, but these three gentlemen will be there, and a lot of our riders will be there as well. So you can reach out to us. Curtis White and Ellen Noble are Cycle Smart athletes who will also be there. So to get to ride with them is obviously a treat. But you can email us. All the info is on the Cycle Smart website. If you want to inquire about anything that we got planned, reach out to us, and we'll make sure we're communicating with the folks at P to A about our plans as well, so we can publicize that way. But thanks for listening. Hope it was helpful.